Hello! Today I will be doing my 2014 Superlatives and Favorites. Let's start off with some statistics of what I read this year. I may have changed my Goodreads to read goal many a time, but I settled on 50 books finally, and I completed it. So let's dive into that 50 a little bit, shall we? I started 13 new series this year. Wow. That's a lot. Because I only completed 4 series this year. In my defense, some of the second books aren't written yet. Like, I read The Fifth Wave, and I read Rebel Belle, and they're both the start of a new series. So that's something. I also read 15 standalone books. My favorite genre, as usual, is fantasy, and I read 7 fantasy books, and as you know, fantasy are a little chunky. And maybe some of the books I read may also count as fantasy, but these are high fantasy that I was counting. I read 6 classics, which is probably the most classics I've read in a year in quite some time. And my biggest category is I read 16 manga and graphic novels. I also read over 15,000 pages this year, which is 3 times the amount I read last year. Which, if I do say so myself, that is pretty stinking amazing. Now, let's talk about my top favorites of the books I read in 2014. I didn't want to talk about any honorable mentions, so I've narrowed it down to my top 7 books that I read in 2014. Now, most of these didn't come out in 2014, but I read them this year, so that is what we're talking about. Don't get confused. So, number 7, we have William Shakespeare's Star Wars by Ian Dosher. Now, I've talked about this book a little bit. I read it back in February, so it was one of the first books I read this year. This is Star Wars A New Hope, which is the episode 4, and it is written in sonnet and verse as a play, as if Shakespeare wrote it. Really nice pictures in it. It is just hilarious. There's so many fun things in this, and it's just great. And I really need to get my hands on the other 2. He's also done episode 5 and 6. I'm not sure if he's going to do episode 1, 2, and 3. I don't think so, but I need to get my hands on 5 and 6. Next we have an anthology of sorts, and that is The World's Shortest Stories, edited by Steve Moss. I actually had to read this for a class, but it was so worth it. This book is so good. All these stories are 55 words or less, so they all just kind of give you a punch in the gut, and they're so powerful and so good, and I highly recommend this kind of genre of 55-word stories. At number 5, we have We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This is my first E. Lockhart book, and I went in knowing absolutely nothing about the book. This was a book explosion book of the month back over the summer, and it is about these rich families of this private island that they go to every summer. And it's a mystery, and you don't really know what's going on. But at the end, I bawled my eyes out. It is so, so good. It may be supernaturally, she may be crazy. It's kind of Mara Dyer-esque, if you've read that. And I highly, highly recommend it. While I was reading it, I was listening to Birdie, and I think they go really well together. Now, speaking of Mara Dyer, at number 4, we have The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin. This is the first book in a trilogy, which I haven't read the other 2 yet. I'm currently rereading it, actually. It is about this girl who has been in an accident and she doesn't remember anything that happens, but 2 of her friends are dead. She has to overcome what she's been diagnosed with, PTSD. It's just so intense. And this is actually Michelle Hodkin's first book. It's her debut novel. I highly, highly recommend it. Then I'm going to cheat a little bit because I couldn't pick just one from this series. So I'm going to tell you the whole series. Because I did read the whole series this year. And that is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor, which also includes Days of Blood and Starlight and Dreams of Gods and Monsters. I have shown these in so many videos because I read them over the summer when I was starting BookTube, and it is a fantasy series about angels and chimera and their rivalry. It's another star-crossed lover kind of story, but it's so much more than that. It's a lot of fantasy and adventure and war, and it's just so, so good. At number 2, we have a book that I finally got to, and it is probably in everybody's top favorites ever. And that is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This is a book that takes place during World War II in Germany, and is actually written in the point of view of death. I've talked about this book a little bit as well, and it is amazingly written, and it's so poetic, and just the feels, it's so good, and if you haven't read this yet, you really, really need to. And at the number 1 spot is another series. It's another fantasy. You may be able to guess what I'm going to say, and that is the Song of Ice and Fire series. I read Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords this year. It is written by George R.R. Martin. I'll be reading this one soon, but it's the only one I have with me because I'm borrowing them from a friend. This is a high fantasy series, and so much happens. There's war and family conflict and love and betrayal and dragons and kings, and it just has it all, and it is so, so fantastic. Yes, George R. R. Martin may like to describe food, but he does a good job at it, and I can't wait to continue with this series. I've also been watching this show, which is equally fantastic, and can't wait to continue. I hope you enjoyed me sharing my favorites this year and some of the statistics that I accomplished. Please let me know what you read this year down below, and what were your favorites this year. I will see you in another video soon. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye!